Hi, welcome to ToddFun.com, where I do what I think is fun. Today, I'm going to fix my garage door. The spring broke, again, for the fourth time. The last three times I jumped up there and welded it with my MIG welder. It lasted about a year, but then because the spring had reached end of life, anyway, it broke someplace else eventually within a year. I wanted to have a service company do that, but they would quote me one number, come over, and then try and upsell me for a better spring that would actually last more than a year or two. I didn't want that. So if I'm spending $400 to fix this two-car garage door spring, then I just figured I might as well just go buy a good spring myself and do the work myself. I went to Wayne-Dalton, who is in Tempe, Arizona, and they have a service center where they just say, bring in the size and shape, dimensions, and weight of your door, and they will cut you a spring right from their stock. Or you can bring in the old spring and they can use that to get you an identical one. Well, I went in with the measurements of my door and asked to go from a one spring system to a two spring system so that I have two springs assisting the motor. That changes, of course, the size of the spring, the length of the spring, and the stock they use. But they do all the math for you. Now I'll have a 50,000 cycle door. So I won't probably have to fix it for many, many, many years. But that's my solution. I'm showing how I'm going to fix, just put up the new spring. I took it down in the same way, just the reverse order. I'm not showing you how to fix your garage door. I'm not showing you how to put up a garage door spring, because this is something this is a dangerous thing and you should call a professional and have them do it for you. But I've done this before, I know how to do it, and I'm going to show how I do it. That's just a disclaimer. Don't do this, it's dangerous. Okay. I'm also going to show a few other things that I check on my garage door in case you have to service your garage door, things that aren't dangerous, like greasing and so forth. So let's go and get into it. Okay, so first off I have a three-car garage, a single port and two port, and it's the two port one that we use all the time, so it's broke. And on the floor here is the original pipe that goes across the top of the garage, and then now I have two springs instead of just one. And it'll go across from that side to that side. Something that your normal homeowner can do is, if you have a worm gear, get up there with some axle grease and get some grease in there. That will quiet it up and make it run real smooth. You just get a glove on and stick some grease up in there. That helps out a lot. Other things you can do as a regular homeowner is make sure all these nuts are tight. Make sure they're using either lock washers, or they're using nylon keepers on their nuts. Because if these come loose, then this whole door will rattle. So you got to come by and check all these and give them a tighten up, so that your garage door opens and closes smoothly without putting stress on the motor. Make sure these tracks are clean. Okay. I took off the pole. The pole goes through a bearing on either side. So for me, this isn't something you can do at home, but when I replace my spring, I make sure that this bearing bracket is good, so that I get my finger in there and I make sure that bearing isn't rattling or in any other way damaged. I check both sides because that is the bearing support for that shaft that the spring goes on. On either side of the door, where right before I took it off, I put a mark around where this pulley comes up to before I took anything apart. And then that will go back in the same exact spot. It's not super critical, but it helps keep everything lined up. And there's a bolt that goes in there that basically clamps this pulley, this cable pulley, to this shaft. And then the bearing will ride on this side, the bearing I just showed you. Now in the center, there's the two springs. And they'll actually go into a bracket that's up here, and they bolt on there, and that just holds the pole center and up there. And so they'll bolt these two. If you have one, you just clamp one. If you got two, they clamp together, and they go up on that bracket I just showed you. And then down here, on this end, you'll see that there's the spring on this keeper, if you will, that lets you tension up, and you basically, I'll be spinning this to load energy into the spring, and then when I tighten up these red set screws, they'll crimp into these dimples and hold the spring in place.
And now this whole shaft will move when this spring pulls, hence assisting the garage door by rotating the shaft and lifting on the door. The door is attached to these cable pulleys on the end. These are of course crimped to the pole as well. And then when this whole pole turns under the torque of the spring, the cable wrapped around here starts reeling up. And then that reels that cable up and pulls on the door. So over here there's a cable that just kind of hides back behind your, back in here, tucked away behind this track. And that single cable is what the pulley is, the spring is pulling on. It's pulling on that cable up around that pulley, up here, wrapped around that pulley, and then that, of course, helps pull the garage door open. That's how a functioning door works. It's not that complicated to line it all up. It is dangerous to load the spring, and I'll show how I do that. Okay, I'm going from a one spring system to a two spring system. Now what it means is when I went to Wayne-Dalton, I had them cut me two springs. They're a little smaller, their stock is different, but they do it so that you have a two spring system and the loading equation stays the same. That's good because then you don't have one single spring failure option, which I like, and get more life cycles out of the stock material that they used. So as far as putting it up, my springs are marked left and right. That's an L for left. Looking into the garage, this goes on the left hand side, so my left hand right now looking into my garage is where this goes. If you don't have them marked, then if you take the center, the part that goes directly in the center of your garage, then have the coil up, the cut piece up and facing in the garage, then this is the left hand side. And if you have another spring, then it will also be the same. It will be the cut piece up facing into your garage. And then your springs are cut in reverse order so that you load them the same. Now, this one end, this is the outer end, it has a shaft size for the pole, which is standard, and the inside has a little centering disc that makes sure that's in there so that this stays centered on your shaft. And now I'm just going to make sure I put these on first before I put my pole back up. Okay, now I got my springs on with the center parts in the center. I'm going to throw it back up on the bearings and start putting it on. Okay, to get this out of the way, it's just this pin that goes in here. Pull it out, this drops down, and now this can just slide out of the way. Hey, you see that would be easier with two people, but I managed. Now I'm going to tighten up my pulleys on either end so that they're centered. So there's the two set screws I just put in, and I had my blue mark on both sides, so I know that this is going to be pretty much the same place. Now, there's a cable right here that goes all the way to the bottom of the garage door. You want to make sure that that's all the way inside and behind your track and anything else that could possibly be in the way. It comes all the way up the back side of the garage door, and it has that crimped on the end of the cable there. You come over the back side, and there's a track, essentially there's grooves in this cable pulley. You got to get in that first groove. What we got here is we got a crimped end of a cable. It has to come up the back of the pulley, the wall side, has to hook in here, and then goes atop that first tight little groove across the top. And you want to keep it in there while you roll. Once you get both sides on, then you'll roll it forward with that, keeping that cable following that track, and then once that gets tight with your spring, it won't come off. So here we have one of these cable pulleys on one side, and you have the cable coming down, and I've got it wrapped around top and positioned properly now, and I've gotten all the slack out of this cable, And then I put the C-clamp on this, and I'm clamping this base bracket to this pulley. Once all the tension's taken out of it, and then I don't clamp this tight, but it's enough to where this pulley's not going to move. And then I clamp these two down good and tight. Now, because you don't want one side of your being pulled on a cable harder than the other side, what you do on the other side, which these set screws are still loose on the other side, is you tighten up until you take all the slack out on the other side. Essentially, you're repeating this process. Put a clamp on it so there'd be no slack on the cable on the other side either, and then tighten down the set screws on the other side. That way you have 100% of your slack out of the cables and on both sides, and your cable pulley can no longer rotate on you while you're loading your springs. And that's how you adjust for your cables. If you've replaced the cables, or if you've loosened or taken one of these off, that's the procedure to put them back in a properly ready to go position. Okay, this is the center of the garage door. This is a bracket that holds where normally there would just be one spring going this way, but I'm going to have two springs now. I did mark on this other side where that where this needs to go. I got my bolts ready to go, and this is that little ring that keeps it nice and centered. So we bring that over, so that keeps this nice and centered, and it lifts. This will lift up and go right where those marks were previously were. But like I say, I have two this time, so now I just got to put these exactly where they were before, except for now I got two. Okay, so the dual spring system is up and hanging. These have to be tensioned. Tensioning, loading that spring is the dangerous part. That's the part you want to call a professional for. I'm going to show how I do it. The loading is you measure the height of the door in feet, and if that's, in this case, a 7-foot door, you rotate that 7 feet. If it's 7.5, you rotate that 7.5 times. Hope I said that right. So if there's an 8-foot door, you rotate that spring 8 times. Same as over there. That rotates. If this is a 7-foot door, then you rotate it 7 feet. So eventually a rotation for foot calculation. That's how they construct those springs to make the math simple for the installers. Now, even if there was one spring, it would just be a beefier spring with the same math. It would still be 7-foot door, 7 turns. You're going to rotate it in the direction so that it's loaded to pull up on the, to rotate back up toward the ceiling and back down. So the loading will be on your shoulders essentially. You'll see that coming up. How do you load it? Well, this is how I load it. You call a professional. There's a couple of holes in this, on either end of this spring in these keepers. There's one at the top, one at the bottom. It goes all the way around like that. There's 4 of them. And as you rotate it, you have to transfer a rod into that to keep it from spinning. So you have 2 rods. Well, you can go and get a rod that fits those holes, or you can do like this. This is what I did. I bought this chamois squeezer from Harbor Freight, and when you take the handles off, you have a really stiff pipe, really solid metal with a soft rubber handle, and the end of either one of these where you can put your handle is just a hair too big to fit in that hole. So I took it to my grinder and I took it down about a 1/16 of an inch all the way around. That doesn't affect the functionality of my chamois squeezer. It still clamps on just fine, but that makes this a little bit smaller, just enough to fit in. As you can see, this side's already rusted because I've done it before. So I'll take those off, and those will be my loading handles. Okay, before I get up on the ladder and start doing one side,
I make sure I have my tools with me because you can't stop. Once you start, you either finish the job or you have to rest with the load on your shoulders and back it all the way off again. This is the dangerous part. This is where people kill themselves. They don't use the right tools, or they get too tired. Because you're going to have all that energy loaded up in these bars going across your shoulders. So have your bars ready, really strong. You don't want these bending. These are pretty darn stiff rollers. But I've done it with, in the past, I've done it with just steel pipe I've gotten from the Home Depot, as long as that fits nicely into those sockets and those keepers. Have a marker with you when you go up and mark which side you consider 0 so that every time it comes around you can count 1. My door is 7 foot, I want to count 7 full rotations. And you'll be loading it in the direction in which, you know, once you tighten it up, it's going to pull the door up. And you'll be able to notice that based on the cabling. In this case, I'm going to be pushing, in this case I'm pushing up toward the ceiling, and then it's going to push back down on my shoulders when I rest. And then I go up another quarter turn, and then I move my pipes, and then I rest. And I work my way around 7 times. Also make darn sure you have your wrench with you that fits those little set screws. Because once you get it all the way 7 times, you have to tighten it on so that it doesn't just unload again. You want it to stay loaded. So have that with you. You can't go down and get it. And lastly, make sure your cables are set at either end. Because once you start this, you don't have someone else around to go make sure your cables are square. If they turn out not to be in those channels on either end with those cable pulleys, you got to unload it and go set it again yourself. So having somebody help you is nice, because once they can make sure you're there in case you kill yourself, and they call an ambulance, and they can help make sure everything's fine on either side. Make sure that when you're loading it, these aren't coming down on your head. Make sure that your head isn't under them. You want to make sure your ladder and your weight is positioned so that these come down on your shoulders, or you can get the heck out from under it if you have to. You don't want this coming down on your head or something. So that means positioning the ladder properly. It's a good place for my ladder. I can jump off that direction if something goes really bad and get away, and the ladder's not in my way to stop me from getting away. And I'm going to be able to have these not coming down on my head as I'm loading the spring. Ladder positioning is very important here. So that takes us through 2 turns. I got to do 7. And what's nice about having a 2-spring system is you don't have to put quite as much energy into a single spring. So it is actually easier, not to mention it's probably safer, really, because I've noticed that already doing a 2-spring system is easier. And really the spring doesn't have that much energy in it because it's a 2-spring system, so it'll actually rest against the garage door. Whereas previously, by the time you got this far, you had so much energy in a single spring that it could damage your garage door. So you have to use your shoulder. But this actually stays nicely on the garage door. It's nice. Okay, that's 7. I'm just going to bring it up and tighten it now. There. Now the set screws are in and this is loaded 7 times. We have to do the other spring. That's a lot nicer than a single spring. Seven. Now I gotta tighten up my set screws. And they're on the back, so I'm going to do a little extra turn. Not much. Maybe a quarter turn, I guess. I'm going to go take off those clamps on either side. And if I were taking this off, it's essentially the reverse order. I put one of these in and hold the weight on it and start loosening up the screws so that when the set screws come loose, the weight's on my shoulders. And then I just start doing the 2-pipe thing, backing it back out again until there's absolutely no tension on it.
and then we go to the, and if it's 2-spring system, we go to the next spring and do that one. So that's the off is just the same thing, just reverse order, being very careful. Now I gotta hook up the garage door too. Okay, the cable's in there good and straight. Take that off and it pulls it. That's good. Okay, I gotta hook up my lift bar now. And the lift bar is just held in with a cotter key and a pin. I gotta engage it. So it's engaged to my worm gear. By the way, I leave it unplugged once they break so that no one can open and close the garage door. And plug it back in. Okay. Let's push the button, it should all work. Yeehaw! Smooth as silk. Well, there you go. That's how I replace the springs on my garage door. You call a professional. Thanks for joining.